Chapter 1. The Blossom of Peace. The mist curled low through the forest floor of Athel Loren's eastern reaches, a ghostly blanket seeping between ancient roots and mossy undergrowth. Shafts of moonlight pierced the dense canopy overhead, breaking the gloom in ethereal silvers that danced like spirits across the dew-laced ferns. The forest breathed with an old magic, ancient, primeval, alive. And in this sacred place, beneath the boughs of the massive weirbarked trees, the court of the wood elves had gathered. Caelira Moonglade stood at the apex of the verdant rise, a platform grown from the living roots of a colossal oak heart known as Rilthandir. Its bark bore scars from centuries of war and peace, yet it pulsed with life beneath her bare feet. The wind caught her hair, long as a river, braided with silver leaves, and sent her emerald cloak billowing behind her like wings of virgin fire. On her neck rested the moonvine circlet, a living crown that pulsed with soft bioluminescence, linking her spirit to the forest itself. "Brothers and sisters," she called out, her voice like wind through reeds, soft, lilting, yet commanding. "It has been 20 years since the kin wars bled the heartwood dry. 20 years since I took up the mantle to bind our fractious clans into one voice beneath the moon." A hush fell over the gathered crowd. Kin bands, from the Glen Wardens of Thoril Grove to the Weirdshade Pathfinders, stood assembled, stiff-backed, watchful, armored in bark, feathers, and woven vines. Even the ethereal dryads had emerged, drifting in from shadow and leaf, their eyes glowing with alien intelligence. No longer do the beastmen burn our border glades. No longer do Asrai slay Asrai over pride and ancient blood feuds. Look now. She gestured with outstretched arms to the grove around them. Peace has taken root, and its bloom is strong. There was a swell of murmured agreement. Some beat spear hafts against shields, others stamped feet or sang low forest hymns. And yet, from the high ridge where the council's stones lay, 3 pairs of eyes watched her in silence. Ilarion Shadefall, her general and once sworn bloodkin, stood with arms crossed over his lacquered bark armor. His face was carved in granite, lips thin, and eyes like obsidian thorns. He had fought beside Caelira at the Battle of Blackroot Ford, saved her life twice, and once vowed to never stand against her. But tonight there was tension in his stance, a rigidity that betrayed conflict behind his stoicism. Beside him stood Myrith Silvershade, seeress of the Twilight Vale, clad in translucent spider silk and wreathed in ghost moths. Her gaze never left Caelira, yet her eyes were distant, watching not the present, but glimpses of fate yet unwoven. Her lips murmured words no one else could hear. And lastly, there was Thandor Leafwhisper, Caelira's cousin, rival, and the architect of 1,000 unspoken slights. He wore a smile that never reached his eyes, polished and performative. His blade, ceremonial and jeweled, never left his hip, not out of tradition, but because he believed he would need it soon. "Let the moon blossom be planted," Caelira declared. A sapling was brought forward, its petals white as bone, its stalk pulsing faintly with green light. This flower, grown from seeds gifted by the forest lords themselves, would bloom only under true unity. As she knelt to plant it in the soil at the grove's heart, a chill wind blew through the clearing. Some took it as an omen. Others saw only the natural breath of the forest. But then came the scream. It tore the air like a blade. From the western edge of the grove, where guards had stood watch, came a sickening gurgle and the clatter of falling armor. In moments, the clearing descended into chaos. From the trees leapt figures, shrouded in shadow, their limbs long and inhuman, their movements unnaturally swift. Eyes gleamed with feral hunger. One guard was impaled through the neck with a jagged bone spear, blood spurting in an arc as he fell twitching to the ground. Another had her head torn from her shoulders by clawed hands, her body collapsing with a hollow thud. "At least in. To arms!" Hilarion shouted, drawing his moonsteel blade, the runes on its edge glowing as he plunged into the fray. But something was wrong. These weren't beastmen. Caelira saw them clearly as they emerged into the firelight. Twisted dryads, their bulk flesh scorched and cracked, their eyes glowing red instead of green. Vines writhed around their limbs like living whips, and their screams were layered with the echoes of spirits tormented. "Corrupted," she hissed, drawing her twin blades, Thornkiss and Loonblade. She spun as a corrupted dryad lunged for her, its clawed fingers outstretched. With a cry, she ducked low and drove Thornkiss up through its abdomen. Woodsap and black ichor spraying as the creature howled in agony. More poured in. Caelira moved like wind through leaves, blades slicing through bark and limb. She severed arms, carved torsos, beheaded two in a single motion. Her warriors rallied to her, forming protective rings, fighting like the forest itself. Wild, fluid, deadly. But the enemy was not mere flesh. They struck with spirit magic, searing beams that turned elves to ash or drove them mad with whispers. Sandor, with a blade still sheathed, stood unmoving as chaos reigned. "Mireth!" Caelira screamed. "You foresaw this?" The seeress only stared at her with cold, silver eyes. It was always meant to begin in blood. A javelin, black as midnight and wreathed in sickly green flame, sailed through the air and struck Caelira in the side. She staggered, gasping. The metal hissed as it pierced skin and armor alike. Pain flooded her senses. She fell to one knee. "Protect the matriarch!" shouted Fenrail, one of her sworn guardians, before a corrupted vine tore him in two with a sickening crunch. From the ridge above, Hilarion turned away. "Fall back," he ordered, not to aid her, but to leave her. Betrayal. Cold, sharp, and unmistakable. Caelira's vision dimmed as blood poured from her wound. Around her the forest wailed, but before darkness claimed her, she felt a presence. Warm, ancient. The roots beneath her pulsed and a whisper entered her thoughts. "You are not alone, daughter of the leaf." And then, darkness. Chapter 2. Whispers Among Leaves. The light returned in fragments. The canopy above swayed gently, mottled with green and gold, as if the world itself was still dreaming. Caelira woke to the sensation of damp moss cradling her body, the earthy scent of loam and crushed pine heavy in her nostrils. She gasped, her breath ragged. Pain flared instantly in her side, a fire that licked her ribs and spine. She clutched at the wound and felt the jagged remnants of the javelin still lodged in her flesh, its shaft now blackened and smoking, embedded deep beneath her ribs. Something had burned her from the inside. Spirit course. Witch-forged metal. This was not the work of the forest's true denizens. Her vision swam and she rolled onto her side, trembling, blood slick on her fingers. Shapes moved in the periphery. Figures cloaked in the scent of cedar, their silhouettes soft against the shifting haze. One knelt beside her, placing a hand on her forehead. Cool, calloused fingers touched her skin. Familiar, but not elven. "You live," a voice murmured, deep and reverberating like wind through old hollows. "Barely." Caelira opened her eyes fully and stared into the face of a forest spirit. Tall, humanoid, but more tree than flesh. Its features were carved from bark, the lines of age etched like rings within its face. Antlers of pale driftwood crowned its head, and within its eyes danced a spectral light, blue, cold, and ancient. "Delna," she croaked, and tried to sit, only to collapse back with a hiss of agony. "You child, I am not Thalnor Barkroot," the being replied. "I am Illyrian of the Hollow Glen, consort to the silence before spring. You lie within the womb of the root." She turned her head slowly. All around her, massive roots curled from the ground like petrified serpents, forming a living cradle. Dozens of spirits moved silently, some humanoid, some insectoid, some like wisps of wind given shape. A few had vaguely elven faces, twisted and faded, drifting through the glade with mournful gazes. It was a place forbidden to most mortals, deep beneath the bark veins of the world, where only the dead and ancient came to speak. "You were nearly taken by the Withered One's curse," Illyrian continued. "It eats at your soul. A lesser being would have been devoured." Caelira clenched her jaw, eyes blazing. "Thandor did this. Myreth. And Elarian." Her voice broke like brittle glass. "They left me to die." "There is rot within your kind," Illyrian said softly, "and rot must be pruned." He reached out, fingers splitting into tendrils of root, and touched the wound at her side. Caelira screamed as they burrowed into her flesh, not out of cruelty, but necessity. The pain was incandescent, sharp as shattered obsidian. She arched her back, bit through her lip, tasted blood. Then came the purge. A thick, black ichor erupted from the wound, sizzling against the moss as it oozed from her body. The cursed javelin was drawn out, piece by piece, until it cracked in Elian's hands. He cast the remains aside, and they withered into ash. "Rest," he said, but rest was a luxury she could not afford. Night fell over the hollow glen as Caelira regained enough strength to rise. The forest above was different now, colder, hungrier. The trees whispered not in song, but in warnings. As she climbed from the root chamber, her body wrapped in moss bandages and cloak, she saw signs of the spreading sickness. Saplings blackened before they could bloom, vines coiled like nooses. Even the songbirds were silent, replaced by the dry rasp of insects and the creaking of bark. She was not alone. A shape moved through the underbrush ahead, lean, hooded, eyes gleaming beneath a weather-worn cowl. A bow was slung across his back, and curved daggers rested at his hips. When he saw her, he dropped to one knee, head bowed. "Matriarch," he said, "we feared you were lost." Caelira narrowed her eyes. "Name yourself." "Fenriel Duxtalon, Waystalker, oath-bound to the old bloodline." She studied him. His armor was patchwork, pieces scavenged from skirmishes, hardened leather darkened with use, a half-broken vambrace engraved with her house sigil. His face, though lined with scars and soot, was sincere. One eye was clouded with an old wound, but the other burned with purpose. "You survived the grove?" she asked. "No," he answered. "I escaped the slaughter. Barely." Together they moved north, through the glad paths and corpse-ridden hollows of what had once been her realm. The forest bore wounds deeper than mere betrayal. They passed a patrol nailed to a heartwood tree, their bodies stripped of skin, hearts removed and replaced with thorns. Crows flitted among the branches above, feeding on eyes and entrails. One elf twitched, still alive, muttering feverish prayers to Isha. Caelira ended his suffering with a whisper and a blade. Further on, they found a shrine desecrated, the statue of the moon goddess shattered, its fragments buried beneath the bodies of dryads, hacked apart in vengeance or madness. Someone had painted sigils in their blood, symbols not of the forest, but of Tarnash the Withered, an exiled god who fed on decay. At night, they camped among the roots of a fallen guardian tree. Its once glorious limbs now lay blackened and smoldering, killed by foul magic. Caelira wept silently, for the spirits lost. By dawn, they reached a glade untouched by the corruption, a place known as Elineth's Vale, home to the last of the Moonweavers. The hidden kin-bands emerged from the ferns like ghosts, eyes wary, hands on bows. But when they saw Caelira, many dropped to one knee. "You returned," whispered a young elf maid. "We thought you had become part of the roots." Caelira stepped forward, chin high, cloak tattered but eyes unbroken. "I was betrayed," she said to them all. "My blood lies on the gravestones, my throne usurped, our spirits corrupted, but I do not return as a queen. I return as a blade." She drew her sword, glistening with blackened ichor, and raised it toward the morning light filtering through the leaves. "I will cut the rot from the forest. I will make the roots bleed if I must. Who stands with me?" Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then came the first voice, "I do." Then another, "and I." And soon a chorus rose from the gathered, an oath reborn in blood and fury. The forest itself seemed to stir, awakened by the vow. The hunt for vengeance had begun. Chapter 3. The Thorn Pact. The glade of Mercurith was a wound upon the earth, a place shunned by the light, where the trees grew twisted, gnarled, and silent. No bird sang here, no wind dared pass. The air was thick with the scent of rot and old blood, and the leaves above were as black as ash, as if fire had stained their veins permanently. Branches curled like fingers around one another, forming a suffocating canopy that blotted out the sun even at midday. Here, in this cursed place, Thandor Leafwhisper knelt before a tree that bled. It pulsed like a heart, vast and ancient. Its bark oozed thick red sap that steamed where it hit the cursed soil. Its roots writhed gently, as if dreaming. This was no ordinary tree. This was the Wimbark, a remnant of the oldest corruption to ever touch Athel Loren. And it listened. Thandor's ceremonial robes were soaked in sweat, though no heat touched this grove. His hands were bare, resting on the blood-slicked roots. Before him, in a circle of carved stone runes, stood the other two traitors. Ilarion Shadefell, still clad in his battle-worn armor, stood rigid, with arms behind his back, but his eyes twitched constantly, betraying unease. This place, this desecrated grove, was not one warriors like him found comforting. Still, he had come. And Myrith Silvershade knelt beside Thandor, her silver hair unbound, her eyes wide, pupils dilated into pits of black. She murmured constantly, threads of prophecy falling from her lips like broken prayers. Her skin glowed faintly with unnatural light, her breath visible in the warm air, as if frost clung to her spirit. "The pact must be made," she whispered. "The pact was always to be made. In blood, in bone, in sap," the Warmbark answered. It moaned, not in wood creaking, but in a chorus of voices, warped and echoing, as though the trees themselves screamed through ages of torment. Faces formed briefly in the bark, weeping elves, howling beasts, even dryads writhing in agony. Then they vanished, swallowed by the tree's hunger. From the darkness came the dryads. But these were not the gentle shepherds of the glade. These were the Witchbarks, a splinter faction, exiled centuries ago, corrupted by dark spirit magic and the whispers of the forgotten god, Tarnosh the Withered. Their limbs twisted like splinters driven into flesh, their eyes glowing green like rot, and their mouths split into jagged maws filled with thorny teeth. Each step they took left behind blackened footprints of dead moth. Their leader, a towering Sheelmaet named Shiliath of the Thorn Tongue, emerged with slow, deliberate grace. Her face was cracked porcelain bark, half beautiful and half nightmare, and her voice came in two tones, one high melodic, the other guttural and hollow. "You seek the pact, traitors," she hissed, as thorns writhed from her arms like serpents. "You seek the withered one's favor." "We seek power," Thandor said, rising to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. "Enough power to undo the line of Moonglade, to rend her legacy from root to crown." Shaliet's expression twisted into a grin. "And what will you give?" "The forest does not give freely, not anymore." Myrith rose slowly, lifting a small wooden box carved from weeping pine. She opened it, revealing a withered fetus curled in a bed of moonflower petals. The thing twitched once, unnatural, not living, not dead. It pulsed with a dark heartbeat. Even Ilarion turned his head in disgust. "The seed of oath-breaking," Myrith whispered. "Born of treachery, bred in prophecy, blessed by the dreaming silence." The dryads hissed in delight. Several fell to their knees, gibbering praises to Tarnosh. Chilith extended a finger, razor-sharp and dripping venom, and touched the seed. A shock wave burst through the grove and the wormbark roared. Branches lashed the air. Bark split and bled. The ground cracked and pulsed like a beating heart. "In the name of Tarnosh," Shylif intoned, "the pact is bound." Her claws slashed Thandor's chest, deep and savage. Blood sprayed across the wormbark's roots. Ilarion took a step forward, but a dozen vines coiled around his arms and legs, holding him still. Another slash tore Myrith's cheek open to the bone. Her blood was not red, but silver and green. Thandor bared his teeth and forced himself upright as the bark of the wormbark split open before them. From the gaping wound emerged a creature of nightmare. It was once a treekin, a guardian spirit of old, but now it was a hollowed. Its chest a cavern of rotting vines, its face a mass of fungus and thorny protrusions. Green fire crackled from its eyes. It lumbered forward and knelt before the traitors. "Your army," Shalieth breathed, "awaits beneath the earth. The hollowed, the thorned, and the broken-rooted, spirits torn from the natural cycle and bound in hatred. But they will only march," she added, "when you have broken the last seal." "And where is it?" Ilarion asked, voice low and cold. Shylith pointed northeast, into the deepest, most sacred part of Athel Loren, the Pool of Spirits, guarded by those who still call Caelira their queen. "Tear it open. Defile it. Let the forest choke on its own soul." The wind screamed suddenly, and the pact was sealed. That night, in the depths of Murkeraith, the traitors dined with the damned. They drank sap that burned their throats and stained their lips with black. They spoke in tongues not taught by elves. They watched as the Hollow tore apart a captured Waywatcher, peeling flesh, severing limbs, and stuffing the remains into the Wormbark's maw. Her screams lingered long after her body was consumed. Ilarion stared into the fire, silent and grim. Myrith danced naked among the flames, her shadow twisting into inhuman shapes. And Thandor, his chest bleeding still, whispered promises to the dark between trees. A storm was rising, and its roots were soaked in blood. Chapter 4. Coronation and Poison. The scent of incense mingled with blood as the moon rose over the glen of starlight, casting a pale glow upon the ceremonial dais woven from silverleaf branches and ivory vines. This place, once reserved for rites of unity and sacred blessings, now pulsed with a festering energy, something dark, simmering just beneath the reverent chants echoing through the ancient tree. Thandor Leafwhisper stood beneath the moon arch, arms raised high. His robes of forest velvet shimmered with enchantments, but the weight of the moment sagged heavy on his shoulders. Around him the assembled kin bands knelt, not all willingly, but none dared refuse. Ilarion Shadefall stood at his side, in full war regalia, his expression grim beneath a helm carved from blackwood and fanged steel, and Myrith Silvershade knelt directly before Thandor, whispering fragments of prophecy into the roots of the dais with every breath, her hands drenched in ritual sap and blood. "My kin," Thandor intoned, voice amplified through enchanted runestones planted throughout the grove. "We mourn the death of Caelira Moonglade, whose light was extinguished by the fangs of the wild. The beastkin, long plotting the downfall of our unity, struck deep. Our queen has fallen." A murmur rose from the audience. Some sobbed openly, others looked to their neighbors with narrowed, uncertain eyes. "We are not blind," Thandor continued. "We know her rule held peace, but peace is a garden without walls. It invites weeds, invites rot." He stepped forward, blood still staining the cuffs of his ceremonial garb. A deliberate choice, a reminder. "I swear to you, by the oath wood and the sap of our ancestors, I shall not let her death be in vain. The glen shall rise. We shall hunt the beastkin to extinction, and from the ashes I shall lead you, not as Caelira's echo, but as your king." There was a silence, thick and heavy. Then Ilarion knelt beside him, driving his blade into the soil. He, Ilarion Shadefall, pledged sword and spirit to Thandor Leafwhisper, rightful sovereign of the Kinbourne. Myrith stood slowly, her voice carrying through the clearing, layered and chilling. "The stars have spoken. He is chosen." One by one, hands clapped, chests, bows were lowered, knees bent. And beneath the silver gaze of the moon, the coronation began. The feast was immediate and gluttonous. Tables carved from living stone stretched through the grove, laden with meats, roasted root beasts, and fungal delicacies. Goblets of amber wine overflowed. Fireflies swirled in mesmerizing patterns above the revelers. Music echoed through the trunks, drums and flutes crafted from hollow bones and silverthorn reeds. But in the shadows beyond the lantern light, whispers slithered like vipers. She would never have fallen to mere beastkin. Plunder moves too quickly. Caelira's body was never found. And where are the grove wardens? They should have spoken at her passing. Such doubts fermented, but few voiced them aloud. Most were drunk, enraptured, or fearful. Some simply hungry, for food, for power, for survival. Thandor sat atop a throne grown from living briarwood, its thorns carefully woven back from his flesh. Myrith reclined beside him, her eyes unfocused, licking sap from her fingertips, as if tasting the future. Ilarion stood at his shoulder, silent and brooding, his gaze scanning the crowd for blades hidden behind, toasts and smiles. Then came the moment of the blood wine. A goblet was brought forth, carved from the skull of an ancient forest beast, its eye sockets inlaid with amber. The wine within shimmered crimson, thick as oil. It was a symbol, the monarch's pact with the spirits and the people. All rulers drank from it. All pledged themselves in the same way. Thandor lifted the goblet, smiling. He did not see the dryad servant who'd prepared it vanish into mist, nor did he notice the slight twitch in Myrith's smile, but he felt it, the cold bite of something else within the wine. It burned down his throat. He set the goblet aside. Then came the pain. His eyes went wide. His limbs seized. A thin line of blood trickled from his nose, then his eyes, then his ears. He gasped, coughed, and spat a thick gob of black ichor into his lap. Gasps rose, panic stirred. Thandor stood on trembling legs, holding himself upright through sheer will, even as the veins in his neck bulged and darkened. "Poison!" someone screamed. Guards surged forward, but Ilaurion raised a hand. "Hold!" Tandor gripped the arms of his throne and let out a howl, not of pain, but of defiance. Myrith was at his side, pressing her hands to his chest. "Let it burn through you," she hissed. "Let the pact protect you." And burn it did. His flesh smoked where her hands touched. Bark-like calluses burst from his skin, crawling up his neck like cancerous vines. His eyes turned pitch black, his teeth lengthening into thorny fangs. Blood poured from his mouth as he convulsed, but he did not fall. Then, as suddenly as it began, the seizure stopped. He rose slowly, face twisted but intact, eyes filled with something else. "The old blood is gone," he snarled, voice doubled with a second tone, low, deep, and inhuman. "Let the new order root itself deep." He looked directly at the accused, a nervous minor chieftain near the edge of the gathering. "You brought the poison," he said, though there had been no proof, no evidence, only suspicion. The chieftain paled, raised his hands. "I swear." But he never finished the sentence. With a sickening crack, vines burst from the soil, spearing his legs and arms. They pulled him screaming into the earth. Bones snapped, blood sprayed the stone. By the time silence returned, nothing remained of him but scraps of flesh and one twitching hand. Thandor exhaled. The crowd bowed in reverent fear. The coronation was complete. And far beyond the grove, deep in a glade still loyal to the fallen queen, the forest screamed. Chapter 5. Ashes in the Moonlight. Night had fallen hard and fast, cloaking Athel Loren in shadow deeper than ink. The moon above, pale and bloated, stared down like a lidless eye, watching the twisted events below with detached indifference. Caelira Moonglade sat alone at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the ruins of Elarith Grove. Her home, her sanctum, now nothing more than charred skeletons of trees and blackened soil. Smoke still curled lazily upward from the wreckage, carrying the acrid scent of scorched bark, burnt flesh, and magic-tainted blood. The once vibrant grove had been gutted with precision. Vine-strung cottages incinerated, spirit altars shattered, and every protective rune defaced with foul sigils drawn in elven blood. The bodies lay where they fell, some curled as if shielding others, some missing limbs or heads entirely. Caelira's hands trembled as she clutched the curved blades resting across her lap. Thornkiss had dulled, its edge chipped from too many battles in too few days. Loonblade still pulsed faintly with moonlight, but its glow was erratic, as though even the weapon mourned. Behind her, Fenrir Duscalon crouched silently, one knee on the moss-covered stone. His cloak was tattered, his hair streaked with soot, and his once pristine waystalker leathers were slashed and bloodied. He hadn't spoken since they arrived, hadn't needed to. The dead spoke loudly enough. "This was no beastkin raid," Caelira said at last, her voice low and cold. "No firebombs, no crude clubs or axes. This was execution." Benriel nodded, eyes scanning the bodies below. Arrow shafts, elven craft, clean cuts, precise. Caelira stood slowly, her legs stiff from hours of motionless grief. She walked among the ruins, stepping over the corpse of a child barely old enough to lift a dagger. Her foot nudged a severed arm still clutching a shard of a warding stone. Beneath a fallen support beam, the face of an old council matron stared skyward, her mouth frozen mid-scream, the top of her head missing. Then she heard it. A faint, rasping breath. She rushed forward, tossing aside debris until she uncovered him, Merlin Duskweaver, her former second-in-command. His chest had been cleaved open, ribs exposed like the cage of a broken bird, but he still lived. "Caelira," he rasped, blood bubbling from his lips. She dropped to her knees, cradling his head in her arms. "Merlin, hush, I'm here. You're safe." "The safety?" "Not anymore." They came at dusk. No warning, no mercy. His eyes widened, unfocused. Fender led them. Her blood turned to ice. He rode with the hollowed. Mailer coughed. "Trees that scream. Dryads, laughing. They tore the roots apart." He clutched her sleeve with skeletal fingers, strength fading. "We tried. To protect the seedstone. They took it. Myrith sang it to sleep." Caelira's breath caught. The seedstone, a living crystal of pure forest essence protected by the Elareth seers for generations. If they had it. "They'll connect," she whispered. Merlin's body spasmed once, and then stilled. His eyes stared up at her, unblinking. She closed them gently and stood. "They defile everything," she whispered. "Not just our people, not just me, the forest itself." From the far ridge, a shriek tore through the sky, a hunting cry, high and frenzied. Fenrir drew his bow before the echo faded, and Caelira ducked behind a burnt-out stump. She scanned the tree line. Then they came. 3 of them, witchbark dryads, their limbs long and snapping like whips, eyes glowing with the green of swamp rot. One had a face twisted into a permanent sneer, her lower jaw removed entirely, her bark flesh riddled with embedded thorns. They moved like wolves, circling. "They've been tracking us," Fenrir hissed. Caelira didn't reply. She drew her blades. The first dryad lunged. Fenrir's arrow caught it mid-leap, piercing its chest. It fell hissing, but rose again as green fire poured from the wound. Caelira met the second with a scream, ducking its slashing claws and driving Thornkiss up under its chin. The blade burst through the back of its skull, splattering black sap and glowing mold spores. The third tackled Fenris, pinning him beneath its gnarled limbs. It drove a bark spike toward his throat, but Caelira was faster. She hurled Moonblade with precision. The sword spun through the air and embedded itself in the dryad's back with a crunch. It screeched, twisted violently, and exploded into writhing vine fragments. Venril gasped for air, crawling out from under the remains. Caelira retrieved her blade. "They're hunting survivors," she said. "Not just us. All who still bear my name." "Then we need to stop running," Fenrir growled. "We strike back." She turned to him, eyes glowing with fury. "No," she said. "We don't strike back." He blinked. "We burn." That night, in a hidden glade deep beneath the ghost willow boughs, Caelira stood before a gathering of battered warriors, spirit-scarred survivors and kinbands too proud to kneel to Thandor. She held a torch carved from the branches of the Wyrmwood itself. At its tip burned the funeral fire of Elareth Grove, harvested from the ruins as a holy flame. "Thandor has crowned himself in lies," she spoke. "He poisons our roots. He commands hollowed beasts, and now he dares defile our sacred seedstones." "No more." She plunged the torch into the ritual bowl of elder sap. The fire blazed green and white, and shadows danced like revenants across the gathered faces. "No more." The cry echoed back, voices rising in fury. From the shadows, the forest stirred. Old spirits, forgotten oaths, something deeper than vengeance. Caelira felt it wrap around her heart. The hunt had begun, and she would leave behind ashes in the moonlight. Chapter 6. The Wild Rebellion. The air was electric with hunger. Dawn filtered through the canopy of the Ellerai cradle, casting shafts of pale gold onto the faces of rebels, clad in bark-wrought armor and scarred leathers. Caelira Moonglade stood before them, her presence no longer ethereal and regal, but forged in blood and fire. Her cloak was torn, her hair unbound, and her eyes burned with feral resolve. She was no longer queen, she was predator. Around her, warriors from shattered kin bands knelt in a silent vow. Each bore marks of survival, missing fingers, gouged cheeks, blackened scars where hollowed flame had kissed flesh. No polished ceremonial steel gleamed here. These fighters wielded blades carved from corrupted roots, reclaimed and reforged with rage and memory. Some even bore spears barbed with thorned dryad teeth, ripped from the jaws of the corrupted during night ambushes. Benriel Duke's Talon stepped forward, the left side of his face now a maze of claw marks. He dropped a bloodied sack at Caelira's feet. "From the patrol near Vient's Run," he said. She opened the sack. Inside were 3 severed heads, 2 elves and 1 dryad. The elves wore the sigil of Thandor's new regime, the twisted vine wolf, fangs bared, devouring its own tail. Their eyes had been gouged out, not by Fenrir, but by the forest itself. The dryad's mouth had been sewn shut with crimson bramble. "Good," she murmured. "Send a message with the next batch. Leave them strung upside down from the canopy, belly split. Let the blood drip onto his roads." The warriors behind her murmured their approval, some grim, others exultant. A rebellion had begun. It began with whispers and smoke. The first strike hit the caravan roads between the Moonshade Hollow and the fortified groves under Thandor's control. A supply line meant to deliver bark bulwarks and seed staves to his growing armies was swallowed whole in silence. The vines that once obeyed his druids had turned rabid, crushing carts and splintering wagons into mulch. Survivors emerged naked and screaming, covered in thorns that had burrowed beneath their skin, crawling like worms beneath their flesh. That same night, a sentry tower collapsed in on itself, its root foundation gnawed through by an army of ravenous root beetles, creatures extinct since the War of Mists. Their sudden return was no accident. Then the real campaign began. Caelira moved like a shadow through the forgotten forest trails, leading a cell of hand-picked assassins. They struck at night, each kill a message, each retreat a ghost. One evening, she slipped silently into a sentry glade known as Blackfen Watch, where a dozen of Thandor's elite rested, armor half removed, blades unsheathed. She watched from the trees as they laughed, drank, and debated their victories. Then she fell upon them. Thornkiss severed a throat before a scream could be raised. Loonblade embedded itself in the back of a fleeing soldier, the blade humming in delight. A panicked elf turned to run and caught Caelira's stare, only for a vine to erupt from the ground, snapping his legs backward at the knees. He howled as she descended on him, driving her blade through his mouth and into the moss beneath. His blood fountained as she whispered into his ear, "Tell Thandor the forest remembers." But the rebellion wasn't only blades and blood. Caelira had begun rekindling the old songs, the primal hymns of the elder spirits, banned and forgotten since the age of Rootcleave. With Myrith having corrupted many of the forest's lesser spirits, Caelira sought the aid of the Nameless Watchers, ancient beings who dwelled in the hollowed trunks of the firstborn trees, too old to be swayed by Thandor's whispers. To summon one was no small feat. They gathered in a crater grove blackened by fire, where the only sign of life was the pulsating root of a slain heartwood tree. Caelira, her hands painted in sap and ash, sang the Song of Mourning, a melody so old it cracked her voice to utter it. The ground shuddered. From the fissures the Watcher rose. Its body was immense, wooden sinew and moss-laced bone, covered in thousands of tiny eyes that blinked in asynchronous rhythm. It bore no mouth, but its voice was heard by all. "You have bled for the forest. You have bled in it. Will you bleed with it? Caelira stepped forward and slid her palm over the root, letting her blood soak into the scorched wood. Yes, she whispered. The Watcher's body shivered, and with it every tree for miles. The pact was made. The rebellion spread like wildfire. By the end of the month, 6 key groves had fallen. Guardians defected. Waystalkers deserted. Even certain hollowdy began to splinter. Spirits too ancient to be fully consumed by corruption stirred at Caelira's voice. But Thandor struck back. In the Vale of Northaleth, he unleashed a new weapon, the Seed Flare, a creature forged from fused dryad and elf, its body swollen with cursed roots, and a face permanently weeping golden sap. It tore through Caelira's forward camp like a storm. Arrows did nothing. Spears shattered against its bark-like flesh. It screamed in frequencies that shattered bone. Caelira herself faced it beneath the veiled boughs. They circled one another, the air thick with mist and the stench of decay. It lunged. She rolled beneath it, her blade slicing deep into its thigh, but it bled fire, not sap, and the wound closed within moments. The fight was brutal. It grabbed her by the waist, lifting her like a doll and smashing her into a boulder. Her ribs cracked, blood filled her mouth. Still she fought. She drove Moonblade into its eye, and the scream it loosed killed every bird in the trees. As it stumbled, she leapt onto its back and plunged Thornkiss into the scene between its shoulders. Twisting, sawing, hacking. The creature roared, bucked, and finally fell. She collapsed beside it, breathing ragged, flesh torn, and ribs shattered. But victorious. By nightfall the rebellion lit signal fires across the forest. Flares of emerald flame fueled by moon petal oil. They rose into the sky, marking territory reclaimed. Caelira, bruised and blood-streaked, stood before her kin once more. "We've shown them the forest is not theirs to command," she said. "They want us broken, silent, forgotten. But we are the wind through the roots. We are the song in the leaves." She raised Thornkiss high. "And we are not done." The forest howled in agreement. The wild had turned against its traitors. Chapter 7. Shadows of the Old War. The sky above Athel Loren whipped ash and memory. Caelira rode at the head of her warband, her elk mount Ash Thunder, thundering through the root-choked paths of the twilight expanse, where the trees grew unnaturally tall and twisted into spiraling spires. The forest here had long been sealed to outsiders, held in the grip of the ancient oaths forged during the Rootcleave Rebellion, centuries before her birth. But now desperation called her to its haunted boundaries. Behind her, the warriors of the Wild Rebellion marched in silence. Their faces were grim, their weapons blood-stained. Fenriel Duskatalon walked among them, cloak fluttering like a wounded shadow, the string of his longbow permanently taut from days without rest. Caelira did not look back. Her gaze remained fixed on the monolith ahead, the Oath Wall, a wall of petrified roots inscribed with the names of every elf who had ever betrayed the forest. Even her own father's name was carved there, slashed over with ancient judgment runes. The gate beneath the wall was sealed by living wood, braided and coiled into an impenetrable tangle. "Only blood may open the past," Fenriel murmured, stepping beside her. Caelira didn't hesitate. She took Moonblade and dragged it across her palm, letting the blood drip onto the soil before the gate. The roots shuddered, curling backward, tasting her pain. "Matriarch's blood," she intoned. "Let the dead speak." The gate groaned open. They entered the Vale of Shards, a ruin swallowed by green. Ancient siege engines lay shattered beneath vines. Swords jutted from the earth like gravestones. Everywhere the ground was littered with bones, some so old they crumbled to dust when stepped on, others still clad in rust-eaten armor. Here, Caelira had come to find Thalnor Barkroot. They found him at the center of the root-spire circle, standing motionless beneath a willow grown into the shape of a tormented elf. Thalnor was immense, his form half treeman, half spirit. Bark grew in jagged spurs from his joints, and his eyes burned like twin hearth fires. Moss hung from his antlers. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries. "You come to rouse the storm," he said without turning. "I warned your mother this day would come. She chose peace. And you now tread the bones of her choice." Kalina stepped forward, ignoring the ache in her ribs and the blood trickling down her fingers. "Peace died when Thandor crowned himself in the grove where my children once played," she said. "I seek the Heartwood Circlet." At this, Thalnor turned. "The circlet is not a crown, it is a judgment," he said, "forged during the Rootcleave Rebellion to test the worth of any who would claim the forest's voice. It does not grant power, it reveals it." "Then let it reveal me," she said. "If I am unworthy, let the roots take me." Silence stretched long between them. Then Thalnor raised one vast hand and pointed to the circle of stones surrounding them. "Then kneel and bleed." Caelira entered the circle alone. Thalnor chanted in a language long dead. As he did, roots writhed from the earth, coiling around her wrists and ankles. Her arms were pulled wide, her feet locked in place. A jagged thorn vine wrapped around her eyes, blinding her. "Let the past rise," Thalnor roared. And the pain began. Images burned into her skull, visions, memories not her own. She stood on the field of the Verdant massacre, watching her ancestors slaughter dryads who had surrendered, their limbs hacked and tossed onto pyres while elven children laughed. The smell of roasted spirit wood was sickening. She saw the day her mother burned the Shrine of Echoes, ending a decade-long war but condemning thousands of spirits to rootless wandering. Then came her own sins, orders she'd given in desperation. A grove sacrificed to stop a beastkin herd, a spy executed without trial, a dryad who begged for mercy, gutted beneath Caelira's blade. The roots tightened. The thorns sliced deeper. She screamed, not from the pain of flesh, but from the weight of her choices, every decision etched into her soul, now exposed, examined, judged. She fell into darkness. When she awoke, she lay curled at the base of the willow elf statue, her body broken, her mind frayed, and in her hands lay the Heartwood Circlet. It pulsed gently, wrought of living silverwood and adorned with a single black leaf. Its weight was not heavy, yet it bent the air around her, as though the forest itself held its breath. Thalnor stood above her. "You are not pure," he said, "but none who rule ever are. What you are is willing." Caelira rose, trembling, and placed the circlet upon her brow. The forest surged. Vines blossomed around her feet. Spirits flickered to life in the trees. The bones scattered across the vale shuddered, and some even wept tears of sap. Far away, across the groves corrupted by Thandor's regime, dryads paused in their madness. The hollowed screamed into the night. The moon shifted, casting its light fully upon the eastern boughs. The old powers had returned. Caelira walked out of the vale, not as a queen, but as the storm-bearer, and with her came the promise of reckoning. Chapter 8. The Grove of Broken Oaths. The Grove of Broken Oaths was alive with screams. not of the living, but of promises, spoken, shattered, and left to rot. The trees here grew crooked and low, bark curling back from their trunks like skin from infected wounds. Every root and branch twisted unnaturally, straining against the earth as if trying to flee. Crimson lichen pulsed over stone altars carved with names long since erased. Even the moonlight seemed to avoid this place, broken into jagged shards by the tangle of dying limbs overhead. This was where Caelira would confront Myrith Silvershade. The seeress had made this grove her sanctum now, gathering her cult of broken spirit-binders, exiled sap-seers, and weeping bark priests. Once a sacred place of truth-speaking and oath-sealing, it had become a mirror of her madness. The very air reeked of burnt incense and the coppery scent of blood-mixed sap. Twisted spirit totems moaned in the breeze, bound dryads and corrupted wistkins lashed to poles, their souls flickering in and out of existence. Caelira stood at the grove's edge, the heartwood circlet pulsing faintly on her brow. The rebellion had brought her here not by strategy, but by necessity. The whispers of the old forest told her this was the locus of unraveling, a wound that needed cauterizing. Beside her, Fenrian checked his bowstring, expression grim. Behind them, a dozen of Caelira's finest stood ready, warriors who had walked through fire and emerged not cleansed, but burning with purpose. "We go in fast," Caelira whispered. "No mercy. The corrupted die. Myrith is mine." Fenriel nodded once, and then the storm broke. They struck like wraiths. The first sentry, a bone-masked cultist with antler staves, was felled before he could scream, Fenriel's arrow punching through his throat. The second tried to blow a horn, but found his lungs crushed beneath a root Caelira summoned from the earth itself, snapping him in half like a brittle twig. The grove erupted in chaos. Cultists swarmed from moss-grown shrines and collapsing huts, screaming praises to Tarnosh and Myrith, their bodies etched with glowing runes. Some wielded staffs crackling with spirit-warped magic, others lashed barbed whips of thornvine. One hurled a sphere of liquid sorrow, a forbidden potion that turned a warrior's skin translucent, revealing the twitching veins beneath, before she collapsed screaming, melting into the roots. Caelira tore through them like a storm of blades. Loonblade glowed with pure moonlight, searing corrupted flesh like sunfire. Thornkiss sank into rib cages and pulled free with long strings of entrails. She moved with purpose, parrying, slicing, twisting, always forward. A cultist tried to cast a binding spell, but the circlet pulsed, and the magic rebounded, exploding his skull in a geyser of fireflies and brain matter. A hollowed treeknight burst from the central grove, its body stitched with the faces of those it had consumed. It swung a massive bark club, knocking two of Caelira's warriors through the air like broken dolls. Caelira leapt onto its arm, sprinted up its shoulder, and drove both blades into its face. It staggered, shrieked, and tried to claw her off, but she hooked her foot beneath its antler crown and ripped it sideways. The antlers tore free with a crack, and she plunged Loonblade into the hollow beneath, flooding the grove with light. The tree knight's chest burst open, and the forest screamed. At the heart of the grove she found Myrith. The seeress stood atop the altar of wounds. Her arms raised, her body naked and covered in runes carved into her own flesh. Her eyes were fully black, and her mouth split too wide, cracked and bleeding from the edges. Thorned wings of translucent root vein jutted from her back, and her voice echoed with impossible harmonics. "Caelira," she purred, her words like silk dragged through bone. "You've come home." "You poisoned everything," Caelira hissed. "You gave yourself to the Withered One. You sold our future for ashes." Myrith tilted her head. "I saw the end. I only helped it bloom." With a shriek, she slammed her palms together, and the altar cracked. Vines surged up like serpents, grabbing at Caelira, snapping with thorny mouths. She leapt, slashing them mid-air, somersaulting to the altar's base. They clashed in a storm of magic and steel. Marith moved like mist, her form blurring, warping, teleporting in bursts of petals that reeked of decay. She hurled shards of crystallized sorrow, knives made of forgotten memories, spirits bound into scythe-shaped limbs. Caelira dodged, parried, struck. Moonblade severed one of the root wings. Thornkiss gouged into Myrith's hip. But the seeress laughed even as she bled, and raised her hands toward the sky. A storm of screaming faces poured from her mouth, thousands of trapped spirits, bound and howling. The air shook. Several of Caelira's rebels behind her dropped their weapons, falling to their knees, eyes bleeding. Caelira closed her eyes, focused on the circlet. She whispered the ancient name of her house, not the title, not the bloodline, but the oath. The forest roared. From the altar's base, roots surged upward, not corrupted, but pure. White as birch, they wrapped around Myrith, binding her limbs. She screamed, her magic flaring, breaking the grove's altar stone. But it wasn't enough. Caelira leapt, both blades reversed. She drove them into Myrith's chest, straight through the glowing wound where her heart once lived. The seeress gasped, blinked once, and for a moment her face softened. "I saw the forest burn," she whispered. "I just wanted to light it first." Then she collapsed into ash, her form disintegrating, leaving behind nothing but bones wrapped in rune. The grove shuddered. Its corruption began to unravel. Vines sagged, spirit totems wailed and dissolved. A breeze returned. The altar cracked down the middle and sap bled pure again from the trees. Caelira stood amidst the ruin, chest heaving, blades dripping, eyes hollow. Another enemy was dead. But her soul felt no lighter, only emptier. Behind her, Fenriel walked through the carnage, retrieving wounded, salving bleeding roots. He looked up at her. "What now?" Caelira gazed skyward, toward the dark eastern horizon. "We kill the king." Chapter 9. Siege of Thorns. The skies over the glen of Elerith boiled with storm clouds, as the first cry of the war horn split the air like a lightning strike. Atop the blackened towers of the glade's once hallowed walls, the sigil of Thandor, a vine wolf devouring its own tail, fluttered violently in the wind, its silken threads fraying under the weight of the rebellion's fury. From the northern ridge, Caelira Moonglade watched the siege unfold. She stood armored in spirit-forged bark steel, her cloak of moss-wolf hide billowing behind her, and the heartwood circlet pulsing with fierce luminescence atop her brow. In her hands she held Loonblade and Thornkiss, both now permanently etched with the names of the fallen. Behind her, the warriors of the wild rebellion assembled with grim silence. They bore war paint made from the ash of defiled groves, and wore pieces of their dead kin's armor as talisman. "Today," Saedegwa growled, "we don't fight for peace. We fight to bury a lie." With a wave of her blade, she unleashed the siege. The first assault was pure fury. Wargrove dryads charged the walls, spirits born of vengeance and old bark, their limbs sharpened to axe-like blades. They hurled themselves at the thorns and spears that bristled from the fortress, tearing at stone and sinew alike. Behind them came the shrouded kin, rebels wielding chain blades and root bombs, flinging them high over the battlements. Explosions rocked the walls, sending chunks of ancestral stone raining down. From the ramparts, Thandor's defenders answered in kind. Fire vines slithered down the walls, igniting anything they touched. Hollowed sentries launched volleys of cursed arrows, each shaft carrying a fragment of corrupted spirit, screaming as they struck. Rebels caught in their path erupted in black fire, their bodies convulsing as vines burst from their mouths and eyes. A young warrior beside Caelira was hit, his face a mask of awe and terror as he dropped to his knees, hands clawing at his chest. A moment later, his rib cage exploded outward, replaced by a snaking coil of animated root. Caelira didn't flinch. "Burn them all," she said. From the trees, waystalkers loosed arrows tipped with moonfire resin, sacred flame that ignited the very essence of the forest. Flames danced up the walls, licking at banners, shrines, and screaming defenders. Spirit cannons, crafted from ancient treant skulls, roared to life, launching glowing seed bombs that detonated with pulses of purifying energy. One strike cracked the eastern gate, sending a tremor through the earth. It was then that Thandor unleashed his counter. From the heart of the glade came the vine-guard colossi, massive constructs of twisted dryad flesh, bone, and living root, each one bearing faces carved from the skulls of Caelira's ancestors. They walked on legs of woven limbs, crushing anything beneath them. One charged the western flank, where Caelira's elite archers held. It raised a massive fist, swung wide, and pulverized 5 warriors in a single blow. Their bodies exploded in red mist, bones scattering like seeds. Caelira charged forward, rallying her wounded. With a war cry, she sprinted toward the colossus, dodging the sweeping claw of its second arm. She ran up a fallen log, leapt, and drove Moonblade into the soft socket beneath its jaw. The weapon sang as it pierced the creature's spirit core. A shockwave burst outward, hurling debris and limbs alike. The colossus let out a dying wail that cracked nearby stones before toppling backwards in a ruinous heap of writhing roots and scorched bark. Caelira rolled to her feet, body trembling, eyes blazing. "Now!" she roared. Fenrir led the charge through the breached gate. Inside, chaos reigned. Elves loyal to Thandor fought like cornered animals, wielding bone axes and chain whips. Hollowed dryads screamed and leapt from the walls like maddened birds. Rebels met them with ruthless precision, daggers to the neck, arrows through the spine, blades under ribs. The narrow streets became a mire of blood and severed limbs. Caelira stalked through it like death incarnate. She decapitated a commander with a single stroke, then stabbed a wounded loyalist through the chest without pause. She crushed a dying spellcaster's face beneath her boot, scattering teeth like gravel. Her warriors cleared a path to the heart of the grove, where the central temple of Ellerith still stood, twisted now with corruption. There she found Ilarion Shadefall. He stood atop the temple steps, sword in hand, his once shining armor stained black with sap and blood. His face was hollow, his eyes ringed with shadow. "Caelira," he said, lowering his blade. "You made it." She didn't answer. She simply stepped forward, raising Thornkiss. "You betrayed the roots," she spat. "You bled the heart of Athel Loren." "I followed strength," he replied. "And you died. I saw your blood. We left you to rot because we knew you'd never surrender. Then come see if I still bleed." He lunged. Their swords met with a clash that echoed through the ruined glade. He swung low, she parried, reversed, and drove her elbow into his face. Blood spurted from his nose as he staggered, but recovered fast. He feinted right, slashed left, and opened a gash in her thigh. Caelira gritted her teeth and spun, her blade slicing a clean arc across his chest. Sparks and blood flew. He drove forward, slamming her back against the stone wall, choking her with one hand. She kneed him in the groin, broke free, and slammed Moonblade through his shoulder. He screamed. She twisted the blade. "You followed rot," she said through clenched teeth. "And now you'll feed it." She dragged Thornkiss across his throat. Blood sprayed across the temple steps. Ilarion fell, gurgling, his life pouring out in rivers of crimson. Behind her, her warriors raised the banners of rebellion atop the temple. Ellerith's grove had fallen, but Caelira knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of the final reckoning. Thandor was waiting. Chapter 10. Spirits in Revolt. The forest bled from its roots. Athel Loren, primal, majestic, eternal, was groaning beneath the weight of civil war. It was no longer the hallowed sanctuary of emerald boughs and whispering leaves. Now it howled with fury, like a beast wounded by its own kin. The trees screamed, the winds carried death. Spirits once dormant in bark and stone were rising, and they were choosing sides. From the eastern vale to the southern crescent of the Druid's Pine Hills, spectral battles tore through the woods. Glades that once shimmered with light were drenched in ichor. Dryads, split by loyalty and madness, slaughtered one another with claws sharpened from grief. Treefolk burned their own limbs to fuel spirit fire, incinerating traitor kin in purging waves. The ancient spirits that had once sworn oaths of neutrality stirred from their roots, unable to watch the desecration continue. Caelira stood upon the ridge above the fungroot expanse where the trees had grown so tall their crowns touched the stars. Below, the battlefield unfurled, a vision of madness. Craters glowed with corrupted flame. Torn banners fluttered from the snapped limbs of sacred oaks. Corpses hung from trees like grotesque fruit, their faces frozen in screams. The ground was soaked in black sap and red blood, the two indistinguishable now. Her army had grown. Spirits once silent now marched at her side. The briar-rut animated bramble masses bearing the skulls of their first caretakers hissed like boiling sap. Ash sentinels, formed of burned treant corpses, strode behind her, their joints snapping with every step. Even the lamented wraiths, spirit remnants of elven warriors betrayed in the first war of kin, rose in spectral chains to walk beside her. Caelira, crown and living wood, walked among them unflinching. The heartwood circlet no longer simply pulsed. It throbbed with a heartbeat of its own, connecting her to the very pain of the forest. With every step she took, the roots beneath her feet whispered secrets, sang laments, begged for vengeance. Ahead, the armies of Thandor amassed near the Weeping Hollow, a gorge where the river once ran clear. Now it flowed sluggish and thick with the runoff of magic-tainted decay. The twisted dryads and hollowed stood in rank, bodies encrusted with fungus and stitched bark. A new breed of abomination marched among them, fleshgraths, elves who had willingly fused with dryads, their spines erupting into vine-like whips, eyes sewn shut, mouths filled with thorn. At their center stood Thandor's spirit-bound host, formed from bound ancient spirits stuffed into armor forged from stolen heartwood. They moved like statues, silent and suffocating. Caelira raised her hand. "Today, we take back the soul of Athel Loren," she said. "And if we cannot save it, we bury the poison in fire." The charge began. The two sides collided like avalanches of fury. Caelira's front lines slammed into Thandor's with a sound like rending earth. Shields shattered, spears broke, bodies were crushed beneath stamping roots and falling limbs. A briar-rot tore through a line of hollowed, its vines punching through rib cages and dragging foes screaming into its writhing center. Caelira herself carved a path through the chaos, Thornkiss singing as it slashed limbs and vines. Moonblade erupted in arcs of light, blinding corrupted spirits long enough for them to be shattered by her followers. She parried a fleshgraph's whip arm, ducked beneath a second, and jammed Thornkiss into the creature's abdomen. It shrieked, bile and sap vomiting from its mouth. She tore her blade free and severed its spine in a single reverse stroke, leaving it thrashing in its own entrails. Fenrir fired from atop a broken hillock, loosing silver-tipped arrows into the eye sockets of advancing spirit-bound soldiers. Each shot sent a ghost shrieking free from its armor, which crumbled to dust. But it wasn't enough. The enemy surged with unnatural ferocity. For every spirit slain, 2 more rose, tainted, corrupted, or simply too lost to remember they once swore oaths of protection. Then the forest itself roared. From the depths of the vale came the wrath roots. Ancient guardian trees, long silent, now fully awakened, rose on root legs and howled as they stormed into the battle. Each step split the ground, shattering stone. They wielded limbs like battering rams, sweeping entire formations aside. One lashed out with a branch the width of a cottage, splattering dozens of traitors against the rocks. These were the forest's final arbiters, beings who chose no master but balance. And they had decided the time for neutrality was over. The battlefield ignited with wild magic. Boatly, vines erupted from the ground, impaling flesh grafts like skewers. Spectral elk spirits charged through the air, goring hollowed and fading before retaliation. Trees twisted mid-fight, swallowing enemies whole and digesting them in seconds, the trunks pulsing with their muffled screams. Caelira pressed forward, cutting through the carnage toward the Weeping Hollow's center. There, at the banks of the blood-thick river, stood a final abomination, the Root Tyrant, a fusion of 5 treemen and a dozen elven spirits, bound by Miraith before her death. It towered above all, a tree-crowned giant, with a face of writhing masks, screaming ceaselessly in fractured voices. It locked eyes with her. Caelira charged. The Root Tyrant swung a massive, gnarled arm. She ducked, rolled, and leapt, driving Moonblade into its forearm. The blade bit deep, releasing a geyser of foul sap that sprayed across her armor. The creature shrieked and grabbed her, slamming her into the ground, hard enough to crack bone. Blood filled her mouth. She growled, stabbed Thornkiss into its wrist, and twisted. The tyrant reared back. She yanked Moonblade free and climbed its arm like a spider, dodging flailing branches, until she stood on its shoulder. She drove both blades into its central mask. Light erupted. The Root Tyrant convulsed. Its arms tore at itself. Masks fell away, screaming. It stumbled and collapsed backward into the river with a titanic crash that sent shockwaves through the forest. Corrupted spirits fled its husk in ghostly trails, screaming into the sky. Caelira collapsed to her knees, bleeding, breath ragged. But as she looked up, she saw the tide had turned. The traitors were retreating, broken and leaderless. The hollowed screamed in fear. Even the trees ceased their thrashing to witness the fall of the tyrant. Her warriors roared in victory, but Caelira did not celebrate. She gazed eastward, where a black storm brewed on the horizon. Sandor was coming, and he was not alone. Chapter 11. The Heartwood's Echo. Caelira stood before the twilight veil, where the forest bent unnaturally inward, as though recoiling from its own core. The trees were silent here. Not the silence of peace or serenity, but the suffocating hush of a breath held too long, a scream denied. The roots that ringed the veil twisted into spiral patterns, and the air hung heavy with the musk of spirit magic and ancient grief. This was the Heartwood Hollow, where the soul of Athel Loren was most raw. Here the final test waited. The ground underfoot was slick with dew and blood. Her warriors remained behind. None but the bearer of the Heartwood circlet could enter. Even Fenriel had bowed his head and stepped away without protest. The forest had given Caelira allies, power, vengeance. Now it demanded a reckoning. She walked alone into the veil, each step muffled as if the land swallowed sound itself. The light dimmed, filtered through layers of translucent canopy that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat not her own. Faces flickered in the bark of trees, some familiar, others twisted by time. Some wept, others glared. All watched. At the center of the veil stood a single mother tree, taller and broader than anything living outside this place. Its trunk bore wounds, 1,000 scars, each marking an oath broken, a betrayal executed, a spirit bound unwillingly. At its base was a pool of still water, black and glassy. Caelira stepped to the edge and gazed into it. Reflected back at her were not her features, but every version of herself that had existed. A child with a crown of moon petals, a warrior splashed with blood, a lover kneeling before a slain dryad, a tyrant carving names into the roots of traitors, a corpse rotting beneath a pile of ash. The water rippled. She turned, and the spirits came. The elder court, the ancient arbiters of forest will, appeared from the boughs as phantoms of bark, flame, and mist, 7 in all. Some took the shapes of towering beasts with hollow eyes. Others hovered like wind-tossed leaves, faces ever shifting. They circled her, whispering not with mouths, but with the rustle of dying trees. You wear the circlet. You spill the blood of traitors. But what blood is yours? A withered spirit stepped forward, its form an amalgam of twisted vines and scorched feathers. Kneel, Caelira. Confess your sins, or let them consume you. She did not kneel. I have murdered, lied, sacrificed. I stained peace with necessity, but I did not betray the forest. I fought to preserve its truth, even when it broke me. The spirits circled tighter. One reached out and touched her chest. Fire burst through her mind. She was standing once more at the grove of moon blossoms, blood leaking from her side, Ilarion walking away. Her own cries echoed, helpless, dying. She watched herself fall, again and again. Then another touch. She was a child again, watching her mother sentence an innocent dryad to binding exile. Her mother whispered, "We must choose what's best for all, even if it breaks one." Caelira had not objected. She had learned the lesson well. Another touch. She stood over Thandor as a child, watching him cry for a lost sibling killed by mistake in a border skirmish Caelira had led. He had looked up at her, and she had said, "We all serve the forest, even in death." Pain tore through her ribs, through her spine. She doubled over, the circlet glowing white-hot on her brow. Her skin blistered, her fingers curled like charred leaves. "Who are you, Caelira?" the elder court asked. "Queen, blade, ghost?" She gasped. "I am what you made, and what you failed to be." The ground cracked. The monastery opened. From its core emerged the Heartwood avatar, the distilled wrath and sorrow of the forest itself, a titan formed of molten bark and ghostlight, its face blank and eyeless. It radiated age and sorrow, and in its right hand it bore a blade of woven memories. Verdant grief. The duel began. The avatar struck first. Caelira barely dodged, the force of the blow exploding the soil beside her in a storm of root and flame. She rolled, leapt to her feet, and drove Thornkiss forward. It struck the avatar's barked chest and bounced off with a crack, sending shock up her arms. The avatar backhanded her, sending her flying into a tree. Her ribs shattered, blood filled her mouth. But she rose. Again and again, she attacked with loon blade, cleaving into the avatar's flank. It roared, not with voice, but with the scream of every spirit it bore. Its counterstrike cleaved the ground, and vines wrapped around her legs, pulling her down. She stabbed into the soil, summoned the forest's memory. Root surged up in answer, stabbing into the avatar's heel. It stumbled. She used the moment. Caelira leapt, climbed its arm like a ladder, blades dragging sparks across bark. She reached its throat, and there, embedded in the wood, was a blackened seed. The first betrayal. The memory of the forest's first cut. She tore it free. The avatar froze. Its body trembled. Flames licked its limbs. It fell to its knees, hands clawing at its own chest. From the seed poured thick black ichor, history, agony, grief unspoken. Caelira dropped the seed into the pool. The water ignited. The avatar screamed, and in its scream, the forest wept. Then silence. The elders bowed. The matha tree closed. The circlet cooled. Caelira stood, barely breathing, soaked in blood, skin peeling from the fire of judgment. But she stood. The heartwood had accepted her. She was now more than queen. She was warden of the forest's wound, and Tandor's reckoning awaited. Chapter 12. Crown of Thorns. The storm over Athel Loren was not of sky or wind, but of wrath. Thunder did not roll through the canopy. It screamed from the mouths of the vengeful. Rain did not fall from clouds. It was sap and blood dripping from the trees like tears. The forest itself trembled beneath the weight of the gathering war, and at its center stood Tandor Leaf-Whisper, crowned in agony. He waited within the shattered ruins of the Windroot Spire, where the great guardian tree had once soared into the heavens. Now it was a gutted husk, its trunk split down the middle like a rib cage, its exposed heart pulsing with corrupted energy. Vines thicker than serpents coiled across the stones, glowing faintly with green malice. Twisted dryads sang wordless dirges, their mouths sewn shut with barbed root thread. The air pulsed with a rut so deep it made even spirits weep. Tandor wore a cloak woven from the skins of 3 tree lords. His armor, fused to his flesh, was carved from bones of grove wardens he had slain himself. His face, once handsome and poised, was now a grimace of thorn-riddled decay. One eye glowed red, the other had burst, replaced by a writhing knot of root matter that squirmed when he moved. At his side knelt the Thornsworn, warrior priests, who had fed upon the sap of corrupted seed stones, their bodies grotesque, their spines blooming with bark-like cancer. They beat their chests in rhythm with the heartbeat of the worm root, each thump a pulse of sickly green light through the ruins. But above all, Thandor held the crown of thorns. Forged in secret by Myrith before her death, it was a helm of living vines and cursed iron, laced with the sap of betrayed spirits. It whispered to him constantly, echoing with voices that weren't his, forest gods long exiled, dryads who had forsaken all balance, elven ghosts who begged for one last moment of vengeance, and today he would give them that moment. Caelira arrived in silence. Her warband did not march. They did not shout. They glided through the ruined boughs like reapers in fog. The path behind them was scorched where their spirit allies walked. Dryads reborn in vengeance, treemen hollowed and bound in retribution, and wraiths of the elderkin, dragging chains behind them that clinked with the weight of history. She wore the heartwood circlet like a halo of flame. Her armor glistened with blood and sap. Her blades hummed with spirit song, Loonblade thrumming with celestial fury, Thornkiss blackened at the edge with the rot it had slain. Her breath steamed in the chill air, though her body burned with fevered purpose. At the edge of the weirroot spire, the two armies halted. And in the middle of that desolate field, beneath the gaping ribs of the forest's once proud guardian, Thandor and Caelira met. Their warriors held back, forming a circle of silence. This would not be a battle of nations. It would be a reckoning of gods. "You're not her," Thandor said, his voice deep, warped, layered with echoes. "Caelira died under my blade. You're just what crawled out of her grave." "I was reborn in your fire," Caelira answered, stepping into the circle. "And now I will bury you in it." Thandor hissed. With a gesture, the crown of thorns grew. Vines lashed his shoulders, his arms split open as root talons extended from within. His back erupted in bark wings, not for flight but for fear. The spines dripped venom. His legs twisted into hoofed limbs, and his breath stank of rotting resin. Caelira activated the circlet. A wave of ancient magic burst outward, flattening the grass, stilling the wind, making even the spirits stop mid-wail. They charged. Their clash was cataclysm. Thandor lunged, claws whistling through the air. Caelira parried with thorn kiss, steel clanging against bark, slicing one talon clean off. Blood and sap sprayed her face. She ducked a vine whip and rolled beneath him, carving a deep gouge along his thigh. He retaliated with a bellow, driving both hands into the ground. As the windroot pulsed, vines shot upward like spears, one impaling her shoulder. She cried out, ripped it free with a spray of blood, and hurled Moonblade. It spun end over end and embedded itself in Thandor's left wing. He stumbled, roared, and charged. She met him with a scream. They collided again, her blades severing fingers, his claws ripping armor. He bit her neck and tore away a chunk of flesh. She stabbed Thornkiss into his gut and twisted, feeling bones crack under the pressure. They separated, gasping. Blood and sap poured freely from both. Around them the spirits began to wail louder. Mourning or cheering, no one could tell. Thandor growled. "Even now, you think this forest belongs to you." Caelira spat blood. "It never belonged to me. I belonged to it." She reached to the sky, and the forest answered. Moonlight broke through the black clouds. It struck the circlet. A beam of pure spirit light ignited within her. She moved faster than breath, blades flashing in arcs of white fire. Moonblade severed Thandor's arm. Thornkiss pierced his throat. He gurgled, choked, fell to his knees. But he laughed. "You kill me, but you inherit this." He touched the crown of thorns, and it surged, binding to her. Vines shot toward her face. She screamed as they bit into her skin. But the circlet flared. Light erupted. The crown screamed. The vines caught fire. The crown shattered, and Thandor's body exploded, burning into ash and splinters, his howl carried away on a wind that shook every tree in Athel Loren. Silence returned. The wormroot pulsed once more, then died. Caelira collapsed to her knees, surrounded by fire, ruin, and the dead. Then she breathed. She had won. The forest whispered her name, and in its echo she heard something new. Hope. Chapter 13. Duel under the wormroot. The ash still clung to the sky like a mourning shroud, and the bones of the wormroot spire loomed over the battlefield, silent now, its roots curled like claws beneath the earth. Caelira stood where Thandor's body had fallen, now only a crater of scorched soil and splintered wood. Her breath came in short gasps, blood dripping from dozens of wounds. Her blades hung limp in her hands, their edges chipped and stained. Her face bore the marks of the crown's last attempt to claim her, jagged vine scars etched from brow to cheek like an angry god's claw. but her eyes remained unbroken. The heartwood circlet, pulsing faintly, still graced her brow. Around her, the warriors of the wild rebellion advanced across the ruined grove. Smoke curled in every direction. Broken weapons jutted from corpses like reeds in a stagnant marsh. The hollowed remnants lay twitching where they had fallen, some still convulsing with spirit residue, others rotting from the inside out, their bodies overtaken by their own betrayed magic. And then from the inner sanctum stepped the last blade, yet unsheathed. Thandor's warden, the one who had sworn never to speak his name, never to leave his shadow. Around Ashthorn, she wore no armor, only a robe of black leaves fastened with thorns. Her limbs were sinewed with bark-threaded veins, and her eyes shone with a steady, deathly calm. In her hands she held the Echo Blade, a relic of the first song, said to record the pain of every soul it ever cut, and to scream that agony with each swing. She walked to Caelira with slow, measured steps. The rebels froze. Caelira looked up. Varel stopped a dozen paces away. "He was not my king," she said. "He was my wound. You killed him. Now, you must feel what he felt." Caelira rose with effort, shaking with exhaustion, yet driven by something deeper. She raised Thornkiss and Loonblade, the tips trembling. She didn't speak. Words were empty here. Varel bowed her head. Then the duel began. The clash was unlike anything the forest had seen. Caelira struck first, feinting left with Loonblade and slashing right with Thornkiss. Viril ducked beneath the arc, pivoted, and brought Eglurblade in a sweeping cut. The blade howled, literally, as it sliced the air, grazing Caelira's shoulder and tearing both armor and flesh. A wail erupted from the blade, anguished, high-pitched, the voice of a child long dead. Caelira winced, stumbling, and Virel pressed in. Strike, parry, riposte. Each blow Virel delivered came with a scream from Echoblade, every soul it had ever slain adding its chorus. The very air vibrated with torment. Warriors nearby collapsed, ears bleeding, unable to withstand the sound. Caelira fought through it, gritting her teeth. She bled from her ears now, too. Her vision swam, but she moved with memory and rage. She countered low, slashed at Virel's thigh, drawing blood. The other woman hissed, stepped back, then advanced again with fury. They traded blows beneath the twisted ribs of the wormroot. Trees leaned inward, branches curled, as if to bear witness. The earth cracked with their footfalls. Caelira's ribs screamed with each breath. Her side was slick with blood. Virel's face was torn, bark flesh split, one eye ruined and oozing sap. Neither yielded. Then Virel caught her across the stomach. The blade tore a gash from hip to sternum. Caelira screamed, nearly collapsed, but caught Viro's wrist mid-makemo and pulled her forward. They slammed together, breath hot and ragged. Caelira plunged Thornkiss into Viro's side, up, deep, a wet, crunching thrust. Virel gasped. Caelira pulled Loonblade around and jammed it into Virel's chest, twisting both blades in an X. The Echo Blade dropped. Virel clutched Caelira's shoulders. "I kept him from becoming worse," she whispered. "And still, it wasn't enough." "I know," Caelira said, her voice hoarse. "But it had to end." She pulled the blades free. Viril collapsed forward. Her body hit the ground like a felled tree, her blood soaking into the cracked roots of the wormroot spire. For a long moment, Caelira stood unmoving, trembling from head to toe. Her breath rasped in her throat. The circlet flared once more and dimmed. The storm had passed. Her warriors approached but kept their distance. She looked around, at the carnage, at the forest scarred, at the sky beginning to clear. They had won. but nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 14. The Forest Weeps. Dawn broke over Athel Loren like a wounded sigh, light filtering through the canopy in fractured beams, red, gold, and rust. Smoke hung heavy in the air, refusing to rise. The trees groaned as if in mourning, their leaves blackened at the edges, their roots swollen with blood. For all the fury and fire, the forest had not won. It had merely survived. Caelira walked the battlefield barefoot. Her boots lay discarded behind her, somewhere amidst the smoldering corpse piles and broken stone. Each step left a crimson print on the moss, sap, and blood indistinguishable. Her body was ruined, wrapped in makeshift bandages, her torso a lattice of deep gashes, her limbs weak, her face pallid. The heartward circlet remained, fused to her brow like a brand, its light dim to a cold ember. The remnants of her rebellion trailed behind in reverent silence. They moved like ghosts, faces drawn, weapons sheathed. No songs rose, no horns sounded. Only the wind stirred, and it whispered only of the dead. She came to the Glen of Thorns, once the most sacred place in the eastern reaches, a sanctuary where fledgling spirits came to learn their form, where the breeze had once smelled of violets and soft rain. Now it was a field of spears. Dozens of rebels and loyalists alike had been impaled on thorn pikes, their bodies twisted in agony, eyes torn from sockets by crows and vultures that circled overhead. Some had no limbs, others had been bound in vines and slowly consumed, their hollow rib cages tangled in bramble, their jaws broken open in silent screams. Even the trees here seemed traumatized, bark split and leaking, branches hanging like withered arms. Finriel stood ahead, silent, next to a pyre of blackroot wood. His bow was broken, his armor was gone, his right hand had been lost to a hollowed's final strike, and he now wore the stump like a badge of guilt. He looked at her, but said nothing. They stood together, watching as survivors dragged the last of the fallen, friends, kin, and monsters alike, onto the fire. Caelira's gaze drifted upward. There, bound in vines at the highest limb of a dying weirdwood, hung the remains of Thalnor Barkroot. He had sacrificed himself in the battle's final moments, drawing the wrath of Thandor's last spirit abomination into himself, binding it with ancient words of death long forbidden. It had torn his limbs off before his spell ignited, and the explosion had consumed the glade. Now his bark-splintered torso hung limp, a lifeless icon to a forest that devoured its own prophets. "He saved hundreds," Finriel finally said. Caelira nodded. "And we couldn't save him," she replied. The pyre was lit. The flames rose with a hollow roar. Smoke poured into the sky in thick, choking coils. Spirits shimmered above the blaze, translucent outlines of the dead, drifting upward, some peaceful, others writhing. One screamed her name as it vanished. Around them, the rebels dropped to their knees. Some prayed, others wept. A few simply stared at the ground, blinking as though waking from a dream. Caelira turned away. Later she walked alone through the ruins of the Moon Blossom Grove, where her reign had begun. The once vibrant flowers lay wilted, stained with soot and ichor. The stones of the altar were cracked, the sigils burned off. The river that had once run beside it was now a trickle of foul sludge. She came upon a child, an elfling, maybe 6 winters old, sitting beside a body, stroking a mother's hair stiff with blood. The child looked up. "Are we safe now?" she asked. Caelira knelt. "No," she whispered, "but we are free." The girl nodded and returned to her grief. That evening, Caelira stood atop the highest branch of a still-living oak father near the edge of the Heartvale. The sun bled into the horizon, a red smear of exhausted light. She raised her hands. The circlet pulsed, and for the first time in decades, she sang. The old tongue cracked and rough in her throat. A mourning song, a requiem, a lullaby of thorns. The forest listened. Trees bowed. Wine carried the tune. The spirits echoed it. And beneath it all, the forest wept. Its sobs carried on every leaf, every root, every broken blossom. Caelira's voice broke. She clutched her side, gasping, eyes full of pain. Blood leaked from her mouth. Behind her, Fenrir appeared, shaking his head. "You're dying," he said quietly. "I've been dying," she replied. "This is just the ending." She staggered down from the branch, collapsed into his arms, and the wind sang her name one last time. Chapter 15. A Canopy Reborn. The years passed like seasons in mourning. Athel Loren healed slowly, not with joyous renewal, but with the weary determination of something that refuses to die. The trees grew again, but crooked in places, scarred by flame and shadow. Groves once sacred now bore the marks of bloodshed, their roots warped by memory, their spirits reluctant to sing, yet they endured. And in that endurance, something new took root. The story of Caelira Moonglade became myth, then memory, then legend whispered beneath moon-touched branches. Her name was carved into the weeping oak at the center of what remained of Moonblossom Grove, a monument of bark and bone, the base of which pulsed faintly with her spirit. The hardwood circlet was never found. Some say it dissolved into mist the moment her breath left her body, taken back into the soul of the forest. Others whispered it sank beneath the roots of the wormroot and waits there, hungering for a voice to speak again. The truth was simpler. Caelira did not pass into silence. She became part of the forest. It was Fenrir Duxt Talon who kept her fire alive. He took no title, claimed no throne. Instead, he wandered the groves, restoring balance, healing fractured spiritkin, teaching the young how to walk with roots rather than crush them. His right arm was a branch now, gifted by the Watchers in recognition of the sacrifice he'd borne. Its fingers flowered each spring. He kept his bow rebuilt from the ashes of his broken one, strung with hair taken from Caelira's cloak. At the Glen of Renewal, he would speak once a year. No pomp, no pageantry, just a story. He would stand beneath the old oak, the light falling like fire through the canopy, and tell them. She was not perfect. She bled. She broke. She failed. But she never abandoned us. He would point to the gnarled root that wrapped the stone altar where she first rose to power. And she never stopped growing. In the Shadow Grove, where the hollowed had once been bred, life returned. Not by war, but by forgiveness. The dryads that had followed Thandor and survived now spent their days planting saplings in blood-rich soil. Their bodies remained twisted, scarred, but their roots sought light again. The whispers of Tarnosh the Withered faded. His name became a curse, spat only in warning, never in prayer. Some spirits never came back. Others returned, changed. The Rathrots, once arbiters of annihilation, retreated to the outer glades, becoming silent sentinels once more. The Ash Sentinels burned themselves into the earth, forming barriers against future corruption. The lamented wraiths still wandered, their chains quieter, their eyes less full of pain. And then there was the new generation. Children born in the Ash years bore strange gifts. Some spoke to stones. Others could summon flame from leaf. One girl, Naryul, child of 2 rebellion warriors, could make trees bloom with a touch, but her tears killed insects. She laughed like Caelira once did. The forest watched her closely. One night, in the heart of the reborn Moonblossom Grove, Nereal wandered alone, her fingers brushing the bark of the weeping oak. It shivered under her touch, sap weeping fresh. The wind shifted. Voices rose. She froze. A whisper, not in her ears, in her bones. "You are never alone." She turned. There, beneath the canopy, a figure stood, half light, half shadow. Cloaked in vines, hair trailing with blossoms, her face bore scars. Her eyes burned with moonlight. Caelira, not in flesh, not even in ghost, but in essence. Ariel stared, trembling. The figure smiled, and vanished into the roots. Seasons changed. The forest grew again, but beneath every leaf, within every vine, across every blossom stained red and gold, Caelira lived. Not as queen, not as martyr, celebrities, but as guardian. The canopy had been torn open. Here. Now it sang again. Soft, fierce, alive.